Add a few themes to what Fran and David had mentioned from the themes of the register. I think over the last two issues that we had worked on together on the two volumes on the crisis, one of the important theme that we have both in David's essay this year and David Harvey's essay, as well as the one from Anwar Sheikh previous year, is this important theme of the depth of the crisis. How deep it is, the volume of it, we can register it largely as the largest crisis in world history, and certainly marks the third Great Depression of capitalism. And this means when you look at the volume of the financial obligations that have to be worked through, they have to look at it in terms of 10 to 20 years. Which means that the struggle over the form of austerity is going to take a long time. That was the theme of both your essay and Anwar's essay over the last couple of years, over these two volumes. The second theme I think that came across in the volumes is that we're entering a different phase of the crisis. You put it in terms of, David and Fran put it in terms of this long history, but what we also went through in the immediate terms is the initial period of strikes, occupations of the factories, occupation of housing, some of the boss nappings that were going on in France, were then met by a pushback from the ruling classes. And over the last year, we see another phase opening up with the new forms of resistance that have been forming, from the Arab Spring to the strikes and protests across southern Europe to Occupy, and of course the incredible strike being launched by the Quebec student movements. I think one of the themes that then comes across in a number of essays in this register is how to link those resistances with the different political spaces that are also emerging. David put it in terms of a lot of the way that in his essay, a lot of the reinforcing aspects of the resistances from the Arab Spring to Europe, across Europe into other parts. But a number of the other essays raised it in different ways. David Harvey, in his essay, which then has become incorporated in his new book, puts a lot of emphasis on the way that these struggles will be urban struggles. And one of the issues facing the left is building new forms of urban resistances that also have this aspect of longer and organizations of longer and deeper form. He's particularly put it in terms of the rights of the city, but he thinks that he puts it in a wider cast in terms of also the way that urbanization is being restructured internationally. Ursula Hughes puts it also in terms of the fight back over the government sector, which you mentioned a number of the numbers that were laid off immediately in Latvia. The numbers in Britain that she speaks about were 200,000 people immediately laid off. And then moving towards this restructuring of the state, which is deepening the forms of neoliberalism through this incredible new phase of outsourcing of jobs that is going on. Larry Lohman, I think also, he writes in his article about the financialization issue, but this is a larger issue that has been part of the left strategy debates around the world, and that is, of course, how to articulate any responses to the crisis through a new green transitional strategy, whether it's sometimes put in the labor movement about a just transition, but a whole range of issues around green jobs and the ecological crisis, and how to articulate ecological issues in terms of a strategy for the left. David raised another point that has been central to these volumes, and that is that when we're looking at the state response, they're calculating on their own terms in 10 or 20 years, which has meant a major restructuring of the state. In terms of the balance of the authoritarian dimension of the state, the attack on democracy that has been systematic, the technocratic governments that have emerged in Greece and Italy, the way that Harper over the last 2 years has been curtailing democracy from the robocalls thing to the major issue of the cutbacks on environmental. This is a systematic feature of this phase of democracy, this phase of the crisis, which has to be part of our calculations. The other part of the way the state is being restructured as part of this calculation is the fact that the security apparatuses, the coercive apparatuses of the state are not shrinking in size, but have been gaining in relative and absolute size in some dimensions of the security apparatuses. And so what we're facing is a much more systematically anti-democratic and coercive state, which is necessarily goes alongside this attempt to deal with austerity over the longer term. That was also a theme across a number of the essays in the last issues. I think the final theme that is in these volumes was particularly raised in the discussion over the euro crisis that ends this year's volume with a discussion between Elmar Alfader, Michel Husson, and Kostas Lapavitsas about what to do with the euro. The elections unfolding today are going to sharpen that crisis, with Sarkozy going down to defeat, PASOK probably going down to defeat, and the emergence of a different complexion of government. This will immediately put in question the fiscal compact, and the fiscal compact that was signed over the last 3 or 4 months will likely be put in abeyance, and they'll attempt some sort of measure of a new reflationary strategy. This then runs across all the deeper problems of the crisis, of what room they have for it, how are they going to launch all these longer-term bond floats necessary to fund those projects, and whether it will actually deal with the depth of the crisis. So I think it puts on fundamentally the question of longer-term strategy, which you see the divisions in this in the article and in these set of articles between the three, where Lapavitsas is absolutely thinks that exit from the euro is the only possibility for a Greek alternative, which will be more sharply debated after the election this week, where Alfader is saying everything still has to be reconstructed at the European level, and Michel Husson article leaves it in kind of a middling place of how to leverage a wider alternative project at that level. I think that puts on the agenda very much what David was speaking about in Fran, about the longer-term question of social movements and resistances. And in fact, fortuitously, that is what we are working on for the next volume, is particularly turning to questions of strategy. That was what came out of our discussions over the last couple of years, was questions of strategy, which is I think has the dimensions of how to respond to the crisis, but is certainly what both Fran and David were speaking about in terms of the longer-term question of how to build new organizations that are able to take on the form of a much more coercive, a much more deeper neoliberalism in the context of facing a struggle that isn't going to occur in just 1 year, but is going to go on for 10 or 20 years. So our vision of organization building and strategy also has to take that projection. Thank you.